office buildings, lots, and government-owned properties that we no longer need. And to make sure special interests are not larding up legislation with special projects, I've pledged to veto any bills that contain earmarks. Still, even as we cut waste and inefficiency, this budget freeze will also require us to make some tough choices. It will mean freezing the salaries of hard-working federal employees for the next 2 years. It will mean cutting things I care about deeply, like community action programs for low-income communities. We have some conservation programs that are going to be scaled back. These are all programs that I wouldn't be cutting if we were in a better fiscal situation, but we're not. We also know that cutting annual domestic spending alone won't be enough to meet our long-term fiscal challenges. That's what the Bipartisan Fiscal Commission concluded. That's what I've concluded. And that's why I'm eager to tackle excessive spending wherever we find it, in domestic spending, but also in defense spending, healthcare spending, and spending that is embedded in the tax code. Now, some of this spending we've begun to tackle in this budget, like the $78 billion that Secretary Gates identified in defense cuts. But to get where we need to go, we're going to have to do more. We'll have to bring down healthcare costs further, including in programs like Medicare and Medicaid, which are the single biggest contributor to our long-term deficits. I believe we should strengthen Social Security for future generations, and I think we can do that without slashing benefits or putting current retirees at risk. And I'm willing to work with everybody on Capitol Hill to simplify the individual tax code for all Americans. All of these steps are going to be difficult. And that's why all of them will require Democrats, Independents, and Republicans to work together. I recognize that there are going to be plenty of arguments in the months to come, and everybody's going to have to give a little bit. But when it comes to difficult choices about our budget and our priorities, we have found common ground before. Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill came together to save Social Security. Bill Clinton and the Republican Congress eventually found a way to settle their differences and balance the budget. And many Democrats and Republicans in Congress today came together in December to pass a tax cut that has made Americans' paychecks a little bigger this year and will spur on additional economic growth this year. So I believe we can find this common ground, but we're going to have to work. And we owe the American people a government that lives within its means while still investing in our future, in areas like education, innovation, and infrastructure that will help us attract new jobs and businesses to our shores. That's the principle that should drive this debate in the coming months. I believe that's how America will win the future in the coming years. So with that, let me take a few questions, and I'm going to start off with Ben Feller of AP.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. You've been talking a lot about the need for tough choices in your budget, but your plan does not address the long-term crushing costs of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the real drivers of long-term debt. Can you explain that? Where is your leadership on that issue? When are we going to see your plan? And if I may, sir, on the foreign front, the uprising in Egypt has helped prompt protests in Bahrain, in Yemen, and Iran. I'm wondering how you balance your push for freedoms in those places against the instability that could really endanger U.S. interests.
On the budget, what my budget does is to put forward some tough choices, some significant spending cuts, so that by the middle of this decade, our annual spending will match our annual revenues. We will not be adding more to the national debt. So to use a sort of an analogy that families are familiar with, we're not going to be running up the credit card anymore. That's important, and that's hard to do, but it's necessary to do, and I think that the American people understand that. At the same time, we're going to be making some key investments in places like education and science and technology, research and development, that the American people understand is required to win the future. So what we've done is we've taken a scalpel to the discretionary budget rather than a machete. Now, I said in the State of the Union, and I'll repeat, that side of the ledger only accounts for about 12% of our budget. So we've got a whole bunch of other stuff that we're going to have to do, including dealing with entitlements. Now, you talked about Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. The truth is Social Security is not the huge contributor to the deficit that the other two entitlements are. I'm confident we can get Social Security done in the same way that Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill were able to get it done, by parties coming together, making some modest adjustments. I think we can avoid slashing benefits, and I think we can make it stable and stronger for not only this generation, but for the next generation. Medicare and Medicaid are huge problems because health care costs are rising even as the population's getting older. And so what I've said is that I'm prepared to work with Democrats and Republicans to start dealing with that in a serious way. We made a down payment on that with health care reform last year. That's part of what health care reform was about. The projected deficits are going to be about $250 billion lower over the next 10 years than they otherwise would have been because of health care reform. And they'll be $1 trillion lower than they otherwise would have been if we hadn't done health care reform for the following decade. But we're still going to have to do more. So what I've said is that if you look at the history of how these deals get done, typically it's not because there's an Obama plan out there. It's because Democrats and Republicans are both committed to tackling this issue in a serious way. And so what we've done is we've been very specific in terms of how to stabilize the discretionary budget, how to make sure that we're not adding additional debt by 2015. And then let's together, Democrats and Republicans, tackle these long-term problems in a way that I think will ensure our fiscal health and at the same time ensure that we're making investments in the future. Well, we're going to be in discussions over the next several months. I mean, this is going to be a negotiation process. And the key thing that I think the American people want to see is that all sides are serious about it and all sides are willing to give a little bit, and that there's a genuine spirit of compromise as opposed to people being interested in scoring political points. Now, we did that in December during the lame duck on the tax cut issue. Both sides had to give. And you know, there were folks in my party who were not happy, and there were folks in the Republican Party who were not happy. And my suspicion is that we're going to be able to do the same thing if we have that same attitude with respect to entitlements. But the thing I want to emphasize is nobody's more mindful than me that entitlements are going to be a key part of this issue, as is tax reform. I want to simplify rates, and I want to, at the same time, make sure that we have the same amount of money coming in as is going out. Those are big, tough negotiations, and I suspect that there's going to be a lot of ups and downs in the months to come before we finally get to that solution. But just as a lot of people were skeptical about us being able to deal with the tax cuts that we did in December, but we ended up getting it done, I'm confident that we can get this done as well. Now, with respect to the situation in the Middle East, obviously there's still a lot of work to be done in Egypt itself. But what we've seen so far is positive. The military council that is in charge has reaffirmed its treaties with countries like Israel and international treaties. It has met with the opposition, and the opposition has felt that it is serious about moving towards fair and free elections. Egypt's going to require help in building democratic institutions and also in strengthening an economy that's taken a hit as a consequence of what happened. But so far, at least, we're seeing the right signals coming out of Egypt. There are ramifications, though, throughout the region. And I think my administration's approach is the approach that jibes with how most Americans think about this region, which is that each country is different. Each country has its own traditions. America can't dictate how they run their societies, but there are certain universal principles that we adhere to. One of them is we don't believe in violence as a way of, and coercion as a way of maintaining control. And so we think it's very important that in all the protests that we're seeing throughout the region, that governments respond to peaceful protesters peacefully. The second principle that we believe in strongly is in the right to express your opinions, the freedom of speech and freedom of assembly that allows people to share their grievances with the government and to express themselves in ways that hopefully will, over time, meet their needs. And so, we have sent a strong message to our allies in the region saying, let's look at Egypt's example as opposed to Iran's example. I find it ironic that you've got the Iranian regime pretending to celebrate what happened in Egypt, when in fact they have acted in direct contrast to what happened in Egypt by gunning down and beating people who were trying to express themselves peacefully in Iran. And I also think that an important lesson, and I mentioned this last week, that we can draw from this is real change in these societies is not going to happen because of terrorism. It's not going to happen because you go around killing innocents. It's going to happen because people come together and apply moral force to a situation. That's what garners international support. That's what garners internal support. That's how you bring about lasting change. Patricia Zengerle.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President.
Yeah.
Getting back to the